Hello, and welcome back to Nobody Told Me This, the channel where we lift the veil on corporate and professional inside info and make it available to everyone. We're going to dive right in because this one's going to be a little bit longer than my previous videos. So, how many of you have been in a meeting, heard something you completely disagreed with, and just said nothing? Maybe you made a face or gave a side eye to someone in the room. Maybe you typed something in, your team's chat and deleted it. Maybe you vented about it to your significant other on the way home. But in the moment, your words were just non-existent. They didn't come. We've probably all been there, whether personal or professionally. I know I have. And it's a common occurrence. That's why today we're talking about disagreeing, and specifically how to do it in a way that doesn't blow up a professional or personal relationship, and doesn't make you look difficult, but instead actually makes you more valuable. Why would disagreeing make you more valuable? Because disagreeing well is actually one of the most underrated professional skills you can have. And most of us are just not good at it. And it's not because we don't want to do it the right way, but because wanting to do it the right way and actually doing it the right way are two very different things. So let's start with a reframing of sorts, because I think most of us have been taught to treat disagreement like it should be avoided. We're taught, like, explicitly and inexplicitly, that being a good team player means getting along, staying positive, and going with the flow. You don't want to be a troublemaker. The thing is, though, being silent is not the same as being in agreement with something. And being in agreement with something is not the same as actually having made a good decision. So there's actually some research that supports this, and I want to talk about that for a bit here. In 2024, economist Giampaolo Bonomi, and I hope I'm saying that correctly, found that teams where members openly held and expressed different viewpoints actually outperformed teams where everyone was aligned from the start. The disagreement itself created motivation within the group. People worked harder, they thought more critically, and the group produced better outcomes. He literally called his paper on this research the disagreement dividend. Next, there's a November 2025 article in the Harvard Business Review, and it specifically states that research across every social science, sociology, psychology, shows that disagreement offers really important benefits. Differing perspectives spark creativity. It leads to fewer errors, and it drives people to make better and more informed decisions. So, all that to say, disagreement itself isn't the problem. It's unproductive disagreement that's the problem. Okay, great. So that means that productive disagreement is good then. Yes, exactly. But what happens when no one speaks up or voices their opinion? What happens is called groupthink. And groupthink is when a team prioritizes harmony, or at least the appearance of harmony, over an honest deliberation. Nobody pushes back, nobody asks hard questions, everybody kind of nods along and moves forward, even though half the room has reservations about what was just decided. So why did they move forward when half the room has reservations about what was just decided? Because they never voiced their reservations out loud. If you don't voice them, nobody knows. Damon Centola, he is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He described groupthink like this. He said that people can privately disagree with something while publicly expressing support for it. And that the public support creates like this illusion that everyone believes something that in reality nobody actually believes. He called it a weird reinforcing process. We see this a lot in our government right now, by the way. Just saying. Um, the consequences of groupthink are real. Groupthink has been linked to poor decision making, feelings of stifled creativity, and a waste of resources, mainly time, wasting time. Why waste your time in a meeting where no one is going to speak up and no decisions are actually made? In extreme cases, groupthink has actually contributed to some genuinely catastrophic failures. One being the 1986 Challenger disaster, where engineers had legitimate safety concerns that were never mentioned. And we know what happened with the Challenger as a result of that. That's a really extreme example, but smaller instances of groupthink and associated disasters show up in our workplaces every single day. So how do you avoid groupthink or overcome it? How do you foster a culture where disagreement and differing opinions are not only supported but encouraged? Most advice about disagreement focuses on mindset. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. Be empathetic to their position. Try to understand before you judge. And look, that's not wrong per se, but here's the problem. There are researchers at Harvard, UCLA, and the Imperial College London that spent a decade studying disagreement. And ultimately, their central finding was that internal mental states, your mindset, has a limited impact on how a disagreement actually goes. And that's for one simple yet huge reason. And that's that other people can't read your mind. You can't intend to be, or you can intend to be curious and respectful all day long. But if that intention doesn't show up in what you actually say, the other person has no way of knowing that that intention exists. Your thoughts have to become observable behaviors, specifically through your words in a disagreement, or like they don't count. The same researchers identified two gaps, they call it, that explain why disagreements so frequently go sideways, even when the people involved in the disagreement are really trying to come to a resolution. The first one is something they called the intention behavior gap. This is the gap between what we plan to do and what we actually do in the moment. We see this in other areas of life too, like we intend to eat better or sleep more or exercise or whatever, but then real life happens and you don't do it. You intend to, but you don't follow through. The same thing happens in a disagreement. You intend to stay calm and be curious, but then someone pushes back on something you care about, and the next thing you know, you're getting defensive or cutting them off before they finish speaking. And your good intentions were just overtaken by the emotion of the moment. The second gap is something they called the behavior perception gap. And this one is a little more difficult to manage because this refers to the fact that even when you do manage to execute the behavior you intended, there's no guarantee that that behavior is received by the other person the way you intended for it to be received. The other person perceives what you do, not what you meant by it. The researchers give an example of this type of situation where you might ask someone, "Oh, why would you think that?" Your intention was to show curiosity, but your counterpart hears it as a sarcastic dig. Tone matters a lot in this type of situation, just as an FYI, but it doesn't solve everything. This is why I also kind of recommend to stay away from why questions. They can be perceived as a little aggressive. ultimately, like, here's what's wild about this. During the research on this topic, people were asked to rate themselves on how curious and receptive they came across during a disagreement. And then the people on the receiving end rated the same exchange. The ratings were consistently disconnected. People thought they were coming across much more open and receptive than they actually were. The implication of this like discrepancy is significant because it proves that it's not enough to just have the right mindset. You have to develop the right language habits because language is what the other person can actually observe and receive. And what they observe and receive is what determines the outcome of the disagreement. So let's get into what you actually can do to improve the outcome of a disagreement that you're involved in. Based on the research I just covered, I'm going to give you 5 language-based approaches that are actually proven to improve how disagreements go, improve the results of them. So I'm going to give you the concept first. I'm going to tell you what it is, and then give you some like sample language you can actually use that'll demonstrate what the approach is like. So first one, indicate that you want to learn. In a disagreement, people almost always assume that the other person has no interest in understanding their perspective. So when you explicitly state that you do want to understand, people respond really differently. They'll find your arguments more reasonable. They'll evaluate you more positively, and they'll be more willing to work with you going forward. It sounds simple, but most people don't do it. So to like test it out, you could try saying something like, it seems like we're seeing this differently, so I'm curious how you're thinking about it. Or I have a different take, but I genuinely would like to understand where you're coming from first. You know, reframe it, reword it how it works for you, but that's essentially what it means. Like, you don't like restate or argue your position. You just make it clear that you're actually interested in the other person's position as well. The second thing is to acknowledge before you respond. I've covered this in an earlier video as well. Applies to a lot of things. Everyone in a conversation wants to feel like they've been heard. And especially in a disagreement, people worry that what they're saying like isn't registering with the other party. So acknowledgement is one of the simplest and most underused tools in a hard conversation. And giving acknowledgement is really simple. All you need to do is restate the core of what someone said before you respond to it. Acknowledgement doesn't mean you agree with them. I want to be clear. It doesn't mean you agree. It just means you received their message. Something like, I hear you, that your team is stretched. I understand why you're concerned. These are my thoughts on why we still need to move forward. That one acknowledgement that you heard their concerns can like dial down the temperature of the entire conversation. Remember this though, like, and the researchers are also very clear about this. Don't fake it. If you didn't understand what someone said, ask for genuine clarification rather than like restating something that wasn't their actual point. A fake acknowledgement will undermine trust faster than a request to clarify or repeat what was said. Third, find your common ground, because no matter how much you disagree on something, if you zoom out far enough, there's almost always something, some belief, some fact, some piece of the puzzle that you share. whether it's a goal, a value, or a problem you both want to solve, there is a reason that you are working together in the first place. So make that explicit. Say things like, we both want this project to succeed, or I agree with the overall direction, but I just need to discuss this one piece. Those kind of things carry a lot of weight in a disagreement because they reframe it from a me versus you situation to an us versus the problem situation. And that's really a much more productive place to work from. 4, hedge your claims. And this one can trip people up because it can feel like demonstrating weakness, but research on this is very clear on it. In a factual disagreement, a person who acknowledges that complex issues have multiple sides is seen as more thoughtful and more credible than someone who makes absolute confident declarations, especially when those declarations turn out to be wrong down the road. There is almost always going to be nuance to any topic in any conversation. Acknowledge that nuance. Things are rarely all or nothing, right or wrong, black or white. Rarely. Starting a claim with something like, from my perspective, or the way I'm seeing it, or I could be missing something, but those statements signal intellectual humility without undermining your position. They invite dialogue to continue instead of shutting it down. And they leave room for you to change your mind without it feeling like you were wrong. You weren't wrong. You just changed your mind. You changed your position. You got more information and you adjusted accordingly. Way better than having dug in your heels and then being wrong. And then lastly, the 5th one, share your story. And this one is like one of my favorites of these 5 because this one isn't intuitive at all. When we're in the middle of a disagreement, our instinct is usually to like pile on more facts, more data, more evidence. Like we want that support to hammer it home. But the researchers found that sharing a personal experience, like behind your position or explaining why you believe what you believe, actually builds more trust with the other person than data does. There was a study done that found that people who shared like a vulnerable experience that factored into their perspective were actually trusted more than people who solely relied on research and data to support their argument. Your convictions usually come from something that happened in your life. So sharing that makes you more human and more credible at the same time. And that is always beneficial in an argument or disagreement. I shouldn't say argument. They're very different things. Next, so far, everything in this video has been applicable to all of us watching it. We all have disagreements personally or professionally. But if you're in a leadership role, I want to address one more thing. The culture around disagreement on your team is almost entirely set by you. How you personally respond the first time someone pushes back on one of your ideas. It is your behavior in that moment of pushback that matters most. The researchers of the HBR, Harvard Business Review article that I mentioned a little while ago, make the point that conversational receptiveness is contagious. Meaning that like when people are treated with respect and genuine curiosity during a disagreement, they tend to respond in kind. Now, the reverse is also true. If you shut down when someone pushes back, even by just getting like a little cold or quiet when someone challenges you, people will notice. And they likely won't do it again. They won't challenge you or push back again. And by the way, that's not a good thing. You want people to push back. You want people to question you. You, as a leader, have to model the behaviors you want to see from your team. Use the suggested language provided in this video. Fine tune it to make it sound like you. Ask genuine questions when someone disagrees with you. Acknowledge their perspective before you respond, and be willing to actually change your mind sometimes. And don't do this all because you have to, quote unquote, have to. Do it because your team will only bring you their honest thoughts, ideas, and opinions if they've seen the evidence that it's actually taken into consideration, if it's actually valued. So here's the takeaway from all of this. The escalation from disagreement to conflict can usually be avoided, but avoiding it isn't just about having good intentions. It's also about developing good habits. More specifically, it's about developing good language habits. So remember the 5 approaches. Indicate curiosity, acknowledge before you respond, find your common ground, hedge your claims when you're not certain, and share the story behind your position. And if you're leading a team, you need to model all of these behaviors, all of these approaches on a consistent basis so that your people know that it's safe to be honest with you. These behaviors are how disagreement becomes a feature of your team instead of a threat to it. And that is how you end up making decisions that are actually way better than what any one person would have come up with on their own. And ultimately, that's the goal: better decision making. So if this was useful, share it with someone else who you think might find it useful. Subscribe, leave a comment. I'd love to know about the disagreement situation that you find hardest to navigate. Is it disagreeing with a peer, a manager, one of your direct reports? Let me know in the comments. I'd really love to hear about them. And in the meantime, I'll see you in the next one, where I will talk about why people are so afraid of change and how to navigate that as a leader. So thanks so much. Bye.